This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, screenwriter Barbara Curry, wrote the hit motion picture thriller The Boy Next Door, starring Jennifer Lopez. Barbara also wrote the romantic comedy Anything for Love, starring Erika Christensen, that aired on the Hallmark Channel as a Valentine's Day movie event. Most recently, Barbara sold her original one-hour legal drama, Reversible Error, to NBC Universal. She was hired by Fox 2000 to write The Jury and by Screen Gems to rewrite The Perfect Guy, starring Sanaa, Lathan, and Michael Ealy. She was also hired by LD Entertainment to develop and write the upcoming TV series Hard Time. Barbara holds an M.F.A. in screenwriting from UCLA and a J.D. from Northwestern University. Prior to becoming a screenwriter, she spent a decade as a federal prosecutor in the United States Attorney's Office, where she prosecuted violent crimes such as murder for hire, prison murder, arson, racketeering, kidnapping, and bank robbery. She's taught criminal procedure at the FBI headquarters in Quantico and advanced trial advocacy at the U.S. Department of Justice. Well, what a great joy it is for me to have my friend Barbara Curry on StoryBeat. Barbara, welcome.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Steve. Thank you for having me.
Well, the pleasure's all mine. So I'm curious, you've clearly got this massive background in the law, and I assume that that's led you naturally to writing thrillers, that you understand that world very well. But you also have a significant rom-com in there, too, with Anything for Love. Do you have a preference in writing thrillers over rom-coms or other genres? What do you prefer to write?
Well, I like all genres, and I enjoy writing dramas, comedies, romantic comedies, thrillers. I love thrillers and romantic comedies. Unfortunately, it seems like those mid-level thrillers like, Fatal Attraction and those great romantic comedies like When Harry Met Sally or some of the other ones of that era, they just don't make those anymore, and it's kind of upsetting to me as a viewer and as a writer because as you know, things are going by the way of the comic book movies,
for
or
sure,
the superhero movies, and I've never tried my hand at those, but that's something I'd be happy to try to do. But they've got that all locked up with some other major screenwriters, so I don't think I'm going to ever get the chance to do something like that.
Well, it's interesting. You may recall that I've written a whole bunch of animated cartoons. I've written almost 90 cartoons, and they won't hire animation writers to write those big thrillers either, the big
I know.
Marvel movies. So don't feel too bad,
I don't. I don't. But the thing is, I really what I end up writing is whatever good idea I get. So that particular romantic comedy was something I'd written while getting my M.F.A. at USJ.
Oh, is that right?
At UCLA, yeah. And, as you know from going through that rather rigorous program, you have to write a new screenplay, a new feature screenplay every 10 weeks, and you don't get much time in between to conjure up some new ideas. So that was the one I had at the time, and I thought, well, I'm going to write this. And luckily, I'm a little bit funny, so I was able to pull it off.
and somehow you managed to sell it on top of it.
Yes. Well, I really had intended that it would be a feature film released in the movie theater. But as I said, that doesn't happen much anymore. I actually have another romantic comedy that's kind of languishing because that was my wish for that one, too. So when Hallmark came along and they had actually gotten a hold of that script, via a producer who we both know from UCLA, Jessica Yingling.
Oh, is that right?
She was a writer, and she became a producer, and she had actually read that script while we were in school together and had remembered it for all those years afterward, and called me up one day and asked me if it was still available. And I said, yeah, and she went away with it for about 36 hours and came back and she said, I've sold it to Hallmark.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
That not only is that a good friend, but that's a good smart friend.
Yes, and she became a producer on that, and so it was good for her too.
And she continues to work in that. She continues to work. She continues to work in that arena. Yes, she continues to work in the romantic comedy.
That she loves that arena, and so good for her.
Indeed. So, all right, you had this, as I said, this big significant career as a prosecutor. At what point did you know that you wanted to be a screenwriter?
It was a gradual kind of dawning on me. I had little hints and encouragements along the way. While I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, I was in the middle of a big kind of nasty murder-for-hire trial. And a Hollywood literary agent called me up and said that he had been reading about it in the newspaper and thought that perhaps I would consider writing for television. There were so many. There are always so many legal shows on the air. And he said, "Boy, you've got probably so many great true life stories. Would you be interested in that?" And at the time, I was working crazy hours at the U.S. Attorney's Office. I had 2 children. I hardly saw them or my husband, so it's not like I had a lot of time to sit down and think about writing a television show or, writing a script on an existing TV show. I mean, I hardly ever watched TV at that point.
Had you written anything prior to that? Had you written any screenplays?
Oh, no, nothing. And so, I kind of filed that away in the back of my mind. And when I was on a maternity leave, I thought, well, he suggested I go down to the Writers Guild where they have all these scripts. I had never even seen a script before. And I went over to the Writers Guild. I happened to be on that side of town, and I took a look at their library of television scripts. And I thought, well, how could I possibly write for this existing TV show, whatever one I would pick? It's been on the air for 6 seasons. I have not seen one episode. How would I know who the characters are? And so I thought, well, that's an impossible task. I'm not going to do that. I can't possibly sink that much time and effort into getting up to speed on a television show and its backstory and all these character relationships. But I happened to then wander over to the feature side of the library and pulled a couple of those down and saw, wow, they're about 110 pages, and it's created just by that author and no one else, just out of whole cloth. And I thought, well, I think I could do that, like, as if it were so easy, right?
Oh yeah, piece of cake.
Yeah. So that was really the first idea. The first time I even had an inkling that maybe this would be something I'd be interested in doing. And so then, what I usually do when I think I need to know something is I go and take a class. So I went to UCLA Extension and took a couple of screenwriting classes, and that's when I really realized I was bitten by the bug.
You knew from the beginning of writing your first school assignment that this was something for you then, yeah?
Yeah, I really did. And I think also it helps. I think my background actually helped me in that, I did always do a lot of writing. And it was actually not fictional writing, but it was creative writing in a lot of ways. Because you're trying to hold the reader with the story of the case, and you're trying to make even dry legal analysis be entertaining so they want to continue to read. And you've got to have it be organized and logical and make sense. And the same thing with being a trial lawyer. I mean, I was doing a a lot of trials, and what is that but telling the story of the case to an audience? To a jury?
I've long thought that lawyers are very good storytellers, and the really excellent lawyers are great storytellers. Yes?
Yeah, and that's probably why there are so many lawyers who have turned screenwriter.
Yeah, I think that's probably very true. When you're in the middle of the battle of a case, a big case, are you thinking in terms of story, or are you thinking in terms of facts and so on? What does your mind go?
Well, it's always based on the facts, but the facts obviously create a story. And the witnesses, when they come in, have their version or their perception of the facts, which is often perhaps a different story. And so it is all about, I would say, either in prosecution, where I was, or defense, about choosing the facts you want to highlight to, I hate to say sell your story, but to convey your story to that jury.
Oh, you're selling it. You know you're selling it.
Yeah, well, I mean, but that sounds so crass, and it's, but it's the story you ultimately, after gleaning through all of the evidence and talking to all the witnesses and reviewing all the documents, it's the story you think is the right story, and you're trying to convey that to these jurors. And so it's the story of the case, but obviously it has to be based on some amount of facts. But
there's a rhythm and a rhyme and a reason to it, just like in fictional storytelling. And you can't tell things out of order, and you have to tell things so that it makes sense and has a rhythm and flow and a through line to it. Am I correct?
Right, and of course there are times when you can't get evidence in or witnesses in that are in order chronologically, and that's where the lawyers become extremely important, because they stand up at the beginning of trial and they make an opening statement in a logical, cohesive, story-like fashion that tells what the evidence will show, and at the end they pull all that evidence together in a closing argument and tell the story of what the evidence has shown. And those two vehicles, the opening statement and the closing argument, are really what I think help the jury piece it all together, because it does come into them out of order over a multi-week trial.
Do you think that lawyers would be aided by learning what we know from learning storytelling techniques, fictional storytelling techniques? Would that help lawyers in a courtroom?
Yeah, I think it would. But I think it's almost something that a good trial knows innately, and I think a part of that is due to watching television, reading books throughout their lives, going to see movies. I mean, I truly believe that everyone who's been exposed to any literature, media, has developed an ability to understand story and to convey a story. It's just, writers spend a huge portion of their time actually bleeding on the page doing that.
Indeed.
But I think everybody has that in them. Everybody knows what a story is and what a good story is.
And how many of the stories that you've conceived, whether you've sold them or not, in, let's say, the last 8, 9, 10 years, would you say were inspired, I guess would be the right word, by your legal work? Most?
I don't know if it, one definitely has, and it was the very first screenplay I wrote, and I never sent it around or did anything with it. It was kind of my experimental screenplay, and it was based on something that actually happened to me in the courtroom. I was trying a prison murder case, and we were going through the voir dire of the jury, and some of the questions you ask them are, have you ever been convicted of a crime? And these two people were, one was a Mexican mafia inmate, and one was an Aryan Brotherhood inmate, these two defendants. And so you ask, do you have any affiliation with those two gangs, and everybody said no, they weren't convicted of a crime. Well, throughout the trial, I began to notice that one young woman in the jury box and one of the defendants, the Mexican mafia defendant, kept gazing at each other. And lo and behold, they were carrying on a secret affair. Obviously it wasn't consummated in any way, but she had been sending boudoir photos of herself to him in lockup. Wow. And they were found in his cell, and she was the only person on the jury to vote not guilty, so she was the single holdout. And to me, what was so fascinating about that, and the reason I thought, well, this would make a great screenplay, was I wanted to be the writer who sat down and tried to figure out where she was coming from, like what was her motivation to do this, to kind of fall for this guy who not only was in prison before he committed this crime because it was a prison murder, but was accused of committing murder in this particular trial. And I thought that was just fascinating because I think characters and the things they do and decide to do are always fascinating. And so that was the only actual case that inspired a story. But I do have a lot of stories that I think I am aided by my previous career. Like the story I just sold to Universal was a legal procedural, and it involves the law. And I feel very strongly when you're writing for television, you need to portray the procedure as realistically as you can.
Sure.
And
now you're talking about reversible. Is this reversible error?
Yes. But then the other one, hard time that I've written, was about a prison, and I have been in prisons too. So even though nothing came directly from my experience going to meet with inmates in prisons, that aided me in writing that particular story.
So in other words, your experience with the law has informed your writing in a major way, even if specific crimes didn't actually trigger an entire story.
Exactly. That's exactly the right way to put it.
And clearly people are hiring you because of your background in the law. And when you start to look at your list of credits, and when you see reversible error and you see hard time and so on, it's natural to assume that people are looking to you for that expertise. Can a writer gain the same or similar knowledge that you have just by studying it as opposed to being immersed in it? In other words, could I become someone who is in demand writing legal thrillers, though I don't have a legal background?
I think you could, and to the extent there are times when you don't get the law right, those can be corrected by someone who serves as an advisor to you. Right. For instance, I had another experience last year where the people at Universal called me up and said there is a woman writing a legal show that we're producing, and she's having some trouble with the cases. Would you be willing to talk with her? So just like as if I were going to, or you were going to sit down and write a detective novel or the movie Seven, based on two detectives. You don't necessarily have to be a detective. You've read enough and seen enough detective stories to be able to come up with one on your own. The only sticky part is when you're doing something legal or medical that you might not have the real depth of knowledge and the understanding of the terms, the legal terms, and you might not be able to think up scenarios that would work. Like in these procedurals, I'm constantly amazed, for instance, at The Good Wife, that the Kings don't have a legal background. Those are the two showrunners,
right.
But I'm certain that they have lawyers, writers who do have a legal background on that show.
Well, they're either advisors or they've hired other lawyers to be writers on staff. That's usually the case. Same thing with the medical shows, yeah?
Yes.
So when you're working on something that is legally based, that's based on a procedural thing, how much of a stickler for accuracy are you? Do you fudge things every once in a while because it's better for telling the tale, or are you an absolute stickler for the truth in the law?
You can't be a stickler because you see it so many times. The big thing that always has to be fudged in these movies and in television shows is the time factor. There's no way you get a case and then you're in trial within a few days.
Yeah.
It often takes years to get to trial. Yet somehow entire cases are resolved, within an hour on a television show, and within 2 hours. But people understand that compression of time. I think when you're a moviegoer, you understand you're covering days and weeks and months sometimes.
Well,
but it is funny sometimes how quickly things heat up. They get the case, they're in there, and you just have to go with that.
Isn't that true for romantic comedies too?
Sure. It's true for everything, obviously. So that's one thing I think everybody, you cannot be a stickler for any of that. But what's interesting is there are those shows where they'll have one case over the season, or two detectives pursuing one case over an entire season now, which is a relatively new concept to television. And that's far more realistic, isn't it? But you do get complaints from viewers that, it was a little slow. I remember I was loving The Killing, that the show of the two detectives in, I think it was
AMC?
Seattle or Vancouver.
Yeah, Vancouver.
And I was enthralled with that. It was so realistic, and it delved so deep into their characters and to their struggle to figure this out. And, one of the complaints that many people had was that it was too slow. And I thought that was I was disappointed in that criticism because, here they are trying to actually make it realistic. And, of course, people are so used to hearing stories pass them by at the speed of light that when it slows down any amount, you're opening yourself to criticism.
Well, that's true, and the notion of being able to telescope or truncate story, that part of that, what you were alluding to earlier, is what we call the willing suspension of disbelief, and we need that when we're watching pretty much any story, or else it would go on and on and on forever, like you say. Do you still maintain certain contacts in that world where they're able to help you out if you run into a question that you don't know the answer to?
I do have many contacts still in that world. I do not actually ever talk to anybody about what I'm doing, but I know that if I needed to talk to someone, I could. If there was a certain case I was getting into, I could give somebody a call. If I felt they had some real life experience, or if they had, maybe a great idea that I might not have had. But I generally don't do that. I find it works out pretty well.
Stuff that you already know. It's stuff you already know. And I imagine that you have worked with, dealt with many interesting characters over time, and I assume that introduction to all that variety of both good people and I guess we'd call bad people, I assume that helps you to develop the characters that you're developing, yeah?
What I think it does for me is that it's given me an understanding just about humans and human nature in general. I think, and I'm as guilty of this as the next person, that we often judge people by the way they look or what they do, what they've done, what crimes they've committed. And there's always a deeper layer to those people. I mean, it's to everyone you meet. You know, you can never thoroughly know someone and never accurately judge someone. And that, just knowing that and keeping that in mind when you're creating characters is just very helpful, I think. You can never peg anyone.
Do you when you meet obviously you've met lots and lots of folks over time, have you taken characters that you've met and sort of kludged them together into a different character?
No, you know, and I wish I really do just work purely from my imagination. And you know, obviously if I had met someone like now I'm blanking on it, The Silence of the Lambs, the Hannibal Lecter.
Oh, Hannibal Lecter.
You know, that would be a great character to actually steal, and I believe that's what the original author, the novelist,
Have
did.
you ever met anyone? Have you ever met anyone quite that heinous?
No, not that quite that complex or interesting. But I think I work purely from my imagination. But I'm sure that in my subconscious somewhere, all of that is rolling around.
Oh, it has to be. It's who you are. It's your background. It's got to be in there all the time. So do you do then, on top of your own knowledge, obviously, do you do a lot of research as well?
Oh, I do, and I've got. I don't know if you know about Evernote, but it's such a great little app. I've got that on all my computers, and
I do know about Evernote.
Yeah, and for your listeners who don't, they should really check it out. I have nothing to do with Evernote, so it's not a selfish plug in any way. It's just helped me organize.
Nor is it a plug for StoryBeat, though that would be fine by me.
It's just so great because it's this organizational app that you're reading a Wikipedia page or a news page, and it's something that, wow, this would really be a good idea for this project. And you click it, and you have folders, so you click on that page, and it will download and save that page. And I don't know now why I'm telling you. Oh, do I do a lot of research? So yes, I do. I'm on the computer a lot, and I do a lot of research. For instance, when I was writing Reversible Error, I knew I needed a case of the week for that pilot.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much a hybrid. It's about a female attorney who is wrongfully convicted of killing her husband, and she gets out several years later because her conviction was reversed, and then she's got to come home to the town and the family, many of whom believe she's guilty, and the prosecutor is intent upon charging her again with this, and so she's got to figure out who killed her husband. She's got to win her family, her children back, who are alienated from her now because of this, and she's got to find a job, and no one wants her in their firm. She doesn't even have a law license yet anymore. So but the one thing, there's a lot going on there, but I knew it was going to be a network show, and it needed to have a procedural component, and I spent hours researching what kind of case should be the case of this week. And, I came up with a bunch of ideas, and it's only going through all those ideas and researching that you can actually stumble upon the one that just, gets your blood going.
The takeaway there for me, Barbara, is that, and I find it fascinating, that despite all of your years of doing it, you still need to go look for more. And that it doesn't matter how much knowledge you have or how much background you have, you need to continue to dig deep for things that help to enhance your storytelling. And that's clearly what you're doing when you're doing all that research, is you're trying to find something that goes beyond what's in your basket, so to speak.
Right.
So let's talk about a little bit about your inspirations. Who are your artistic heroes? Who do you look at as a screenwriter that you admire?
Oh gosh, well, there's so many. I don't know. That's a really hard question.
Pick one. We'll never know if you're not telling us the truth.
Well, I'm gonna put a shout out for the ladies and do Susanna Grant, who
Sure.
wrote Erin Brockovich and
Absolutely.
many other great things. She's a great writer. The woman who wrote Thelma and Louise, I can't think of her name.
I'm trying to think of her.
wanting to say
Oh,
she
that's
also wrote-
Callie Curry.
Callie Curry, right?
Won an Oscar
yeah,
for that.
But there, and actually, I actually, this is very odd, I'm sure, but I actually prefer reading screenplays to seeing movies. I don't
Is
know
that
why.
right?
Yeah, it might be because I love reading books so much.
You could also
but
have a very vivid imagination, and the movies don't do it for you.
Well, I mean, there are a couple of factors at work. I think many times the movie becomes better than the screenplay, but I think in most cases the screenplay is better
Well,
than the movie.
I won't disagree with you there. I think sometimes the
And-
screenplays are much better than the movies.
Yes, and so I always either if I'm seeing a movie or even if I'm going to go see a movie, I will read that screenplay, and I find it fascinating. I think we are screenwriters. I'm not a director. I am not a movie maker. I am a screenwriter, and so whenever I get the opportunity to read a screenplay of a movie that I've loved, I will always take that opportunity.
Do you try and read before you've seen the movie or after?
Well, it depends. When the movies first come out, you don't really have access to those screenplays.
Sure.
And so I'm, if I'm in the theater, I'm generally watching it without having read the screenplay. But if if I've rented a movie, sometimes I will read that screenplay first because I'll want to see, why did it depart? How did it depart from the screenplay? It's just really interesting. I also love to. One of the other things I love to do is if it's a movie based on the book, I will go back and read the book. Often listen to the book on audio because those readers do such a great job of enacting that written word with just their voices, and then read the screenplay and then see the movie. So, for instance, Silence of the Lambs, I did that. Fascinating. It's fascinating. And it's a great learning experience because you see very quickly what's cut away to come to that very small 2-hour movie. It's small in terms of what can happen. It's a small block of time compared to what can evolve over the course of a large novel.
Have you done any adaptation?
No, but I would really like to. I haven't, and I'm constantly looking for books. But I think as a lowly screenwriter, there's no way you can get that fabulous book to adapt before some producer who's on the prowl for the same thing can get,
Well, but what you can do is you can go back and find works that people have not done that are in the public domain, and at least write something to prove yourself. I think especially for novice writers, that taking a work that's in the public domain and adapting it to prove that you have the chops to do that is a very good exercise.
Yes, and also even outside the public domain, there are a lot of books that have been overlooked, and one that comes to mind was a book written in the 60s by Robert Yates, I think, called Revolutionary Road. That was just, a book that was written, and it was never made into a movie until recently.
Well, that was Sam Mendes, wasn't it, that made it?
I think so.
And it was Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet.
Right. And I thought it was a great movie.
I agree. I thought it was a great movie, too. Somehow I don't think it was a smash blockbuster. I don't think it... I could be wrong. I don't think it made a ton of money, but I thought it was a very well-made movie. But
in my world, the goal isn't to create a smash blockbuster.
No.
I mean, really, that is obviously a goal. That would be wonderful. But I've realized that just getting a movie made is almost more than you can ask for.
Do you think about the audience when you're writing, or are you only thinking about yourself?
I always think about the audience.
You do?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think you have to. I mean, it's like me standing up in front of the jury. I have to be concerned with what they think. I have to be concerned with whether they're paying attention, whether they're getting it, whether they're following. Same thing with this. It would be kind of selfish to sit there and just try to write something to please myself. I could do that all day long. That's almost too easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got to step up your game so you can make your movie in a way, or write your screenplay in a way that pleases you as the writer, but you also believe will please an audience, will please a stranger. I just finished a feature film, and I gave it for the first time ever to someone, a professional proofreader. And I swear to you, it made my day when this guy wrote back to me and said, "I have to tell you, I can't put this down."
Oh.
I thought, wow.
That's called
well,
scoring.
Well, then my job is done. I pleased the proofreader.
You scored on that one, that's for sure.
I know, but that's what you need to do.
Now, that's not an analyst, by the way. That's a proofreader. That's not somebody that's sitting in an office, yeah?
Right. That's a member of the general public. So, and that's who you're writing for, and that the general public, the movie-going public, is should always be in your mind.
All right.
When you're writing.
I think that's true for everybody that's out there. That you should be thinking about who your audience is when you're trying to conceive of your story, because that's, is there a market there or not? So are you spending your time wisely in writing that particular story? My curiosity with what you write is, and this is a tough question. I know I ask this question all the time, and it's not an easy question to answer, and that is, what do you think makes a story good or watchable or something that we want? What do you look for?
I think you can hook an audience by having a really novel idea, a really cool concept, and often that's what gets me to go to a movie too. But what I'm really looking for, after you think about, that's a cool concept, is the character and the relationships and the character's struggle to overcome whatever problem they are presented with, whether it's an internal problem or an external problem. I think that is what makes a good movie. And if you've got a tremendous novel, interesting concept, if your characters are empty and hollow and they don't have relationships with other characters that are meaningful, then I'm not going to like that movie, and I guarantee you no one else will either.
What do you do when you have a scene that has not enough conflict in it? Do you try to manufacture it, or do you go back to the drawing board and try to bring those characters to some kind of a head in a different way?
That's interesting, because I've never had a problem with conflict, with having conflict in my scenes. It just seems to naturally be there, and I think it's only because I do some subconscious weeding out of anything that doesn't have conflict. So by the time I sit down to write that scene, it's there because it has conflict. I mean, I have to tell you, part of my process is outlining. I always outline. And
Good.
So as I'm doing that, that's almost like, to me, my first draft. I don't really ever have a vomit draft. I think my outline is maybe the vomit draft.
Is that right? Your first draft is a good-to-go draft?
It's not a finished draft. In fact, I believe in rewriting probably, as much as it takes, which could take 20 different drafts. But my first draft, if I were to go out and get hit by a car and somebody found it in a pile on my desk, and they were to read it, it wouldn't be embarrassing to me. You know,
Right.
that's what I mean. It would be coherent and cohesive. It would tell a story. It would have conflict. It would have some sort of theme, even if I maybe wasn't even aware of what the theme was. It would have some nugget of that, you know. So, no, it's definitely not a shootable thing. It's definitely not what I would want to give to my agents or send out as the final product. But it is something that, you know, I would not feel embarrassed about asking somebody to read, or, you know, bringing it to my writers group or anything like that.
Ah, you have a writers group. How often do you meet?
Well, it's been off and on. Actually, my writers group is a group of fellow classmates from my UCLA days, the M.F.A. program. So there are a number of it's people have come and gone. But there's been a core group of 3 to 4 people, and we add on, and then those people move on, and we add some more, and it's usually about 4 or 5 people at any one sitting, and we really trust each other. We are like siblings, where there are times we hate each other. There are times we love each other. There are times when, you know, we hear things we do not want to hear, but we know it's true. You know, we fight. I often come home and say, I'm never going back to that group again.
But yet, I'll bet you every single time you've come out of there with something that was valuable.
Yeah, they do not. You know, that's the thing about getting feedback from someone. You can, you know, something you write can be really good, you know. It can be really good, and you can convince yourself, God, this is really good. But is that all you want it to be? You know, like, do you want it to be like, don't you want it to be mind-blowingly good? And I think that's kind of how we, and it may never become mind-blowingly good, but having that writers group, really, it's like having a personal trainer or a running partner. You know, they're there and they're going to push you further than you really want to go. And I think that's what's important about it. And also, they see the things that you know you've become too close to actually see clearly.
Sure.
So it's really helpful to have at least one other person whose opinion you trust.
And
I think, to run
how wonderful it is that they're fellow students that you were in school with, because you don't fear one another. You have a familiarity where you can say what you're sort of really thinking, even though sometimes I'm sure you hold back, but you can really feel comfortable in saying things and knowing that the intention is not to hurt you or to be afraid of you or afraid of the work. So that's a wonderful thing.
Yes, it is, and I think we all value it, and that's why, even though there are times when we'll go for long stretches of time where we don't meet regularly because, you know, we're all kind of working on our things and getting them to the point where we want to share them. But we very much still consider ourselves a group, and then often we have a flurry of activity where we're meeting every week. So it just kind of ebbs and flows, and it's just nice to know. Also, if you have an idea and you don't know if you want to really jump in with it, you know, you can present it to the group, and you can get their feedback about whether they think it's a good idea, it's something you should spend your time on, you know, all of those little things. So it's a really important thing in my life.
So when you're sitting down to write, is there anything in particular that you must have around you at your desk? Is there something that's a talisman or some food or something that you must have when you're writing?
No one's ever asked me that. No, there really isn't anything. I'm trying to think. No, I mean, I do most often write on the computer. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times I will go and take a notepad and sit down on the couch out of my office and write on a notepad, just write freely. Because I think sometimes just changing that up can and changing where you are sometimes can really help jog things loose.
Sure.
So I do that, but generally my computer is what I sit in my home office every day, and I work from my computer. I did get a spiffy new chair that I thought, now I think, why haven't I had this chair forever? But, I just need to be comfortable and have my computer there, and I'm good to go.
Do you write 7 days a week?
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. For instance, this whole period now, I am at my desk, at least 5 days a week, but I really haven't been writing. I guess it depends on how you define writing, because
you are doing right now what I think of as replenishing the well.
Yes. And I guess the well is empty because it's not overflowing over here.
Well, sometimes you have to take that time off a little bit, knowing that that's where the goal is, and that if you're pressed into service of sorts, that it will be there. But sometimes you have to back off a little bit. At least I find for myself, I need to back off sometimes. So I think that's probably what you're going through. Is you're going back and you're just letting your brain sort of marinate for a while.
Yeah, and I'm, trying to just come up with other ideas, and so I write them all down, and I research occupations,
Mm-hmm.
and it's something. It's one of those things, though. At the end of the day, you think, God, the whole day is gone, and what do I have to show for it? There's nothing like when you're writing and you've got pages to show for it, or even an outline. Oh, I'm up to midpoint on my outline. That's like a, wow, I've done something today. This whole kind of floundering about to try to find the next thing, that's always hard for me.
It's never easy, is it?
Yeah.
No matter how long you've been doing it, it just continues to be some form of a struggle. It gets, I think, easier in some ways and remains hard in others for no matter how long you do it. In all of your travels in the business at this point, have you bumped into one really interesting, quirky, funny, oddball story that you might be able to relate?
Funny, quirky, oddball story. Oh, gosh.
Something.
You really ought to send these questions out ahead of time.
I make you think. So you've never been in a meeting where somebody was doing something really weird? Where I'll give you an example. I have had experiences where, while I was in a pitch session, I have had the person on the other side of the desk taking phone calls, dictating letters, and eating lunch all at the same time while I'm pitching.
Oh, no, that's terrible.
Have you ever had that?
Like my old manager, though. Yeah, no, I have to say, I've run into situations that weren't funny at all and weren't quirky, and I'd rather not talk about them, things that have completely devastated me. But generally, other than this one time, which was a pretty big time, but generally I have found everybody to be pretty respectful, pretty professional in Hollywood. I mean, I think overall, if you really think about it, we all are striving for the same goal.
Sure.
And, maybe we have different ways of going about getting to that goal, but everybody wants the same thing, which is to make a great movie, to be involved in a great project. And so I think, that person, obviously, you should never have gotten into business with, because that would have been a nightmare. So good for him that he showed his true colors in your meeting.
Indeed. Well, we're coming to the right toward the end of the podcast today. I've been speaking with the great screenwriter Barbara Curry, and what I'm wondering, Barbara, is do you have one piece of advice or a tip that you might want to lend to the listeners out there that may help them in their writing career or getting going, or anything at all that might be a good tip?
Well, the one tip I have is, and it sounds kind of trite because maybe it is, but it is to never give up. but I have a caveat that goes with that. When I say never give up, I don't mean continuing to do the same thing over and over again, continuing to send out that script because maybe the 50th producer will like it and prove all 49 who rejected it wrong. While you're not giving up, you have to continually grow. You have to continually do the work. You have to revise and revise. You have to listen to what people are telling you about that script or about that idea, and maybe think, well, maybe I should try that, and try it. I think that it's going to take a long time for you to establish yourself, to be a good writer, to become known as a good writer, and all that while, you can't just be peddling the same 1 or 2 or 3 scripts. You need to write new material all the time. Because that's how you're going to become better, and also because that's how you're going to generate interest in you.
Well, I think that's exceptionally wise, that you must continue to write and write and write. And no matter what is going on, without doing that, you begin to lose whatever elasticity you have as a writer. And so I think that's extremely sage advice.
Well, thank you.
Well, Barbara, this has been a super treat for me today. I've really enjoyed talking to you. And, I thank you greatly for coming on to StoryBeat, and I hope that you are an inspiration to others as they've listened today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure. I remember you well from school, and you are a great writer, and I'm sure you're a great teacher. So,
well, I try.
Students are lucky to have you.
I have my days. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Steve. Bye-bye.
Today's StoryBeat tip. More than 2,700 years ago, the Greek philosopher Aristotle noted that in order to have a complete artistic work, the artist needs 3 things: a source, that's you, a message, which is your story, of course, and a receiver, that would be the audience. Without at least one reader, listener, or viewer, though we hope for millions, the telling of your tale is incomplete. There comes a time in the course of your work when you must let your baby go. This is a process you will go through many times in a successful career. For writers, it happens when readers read your pages and provide feedback and notes. But this is similar in most all works of art. If someone deems your work to be producible, then others will read it and work on making it come to life. Your work will eventually be handed over to the public, perhaps the whole world. This can be terrifying for many who believe that their work may be inferior. They fear exposure will result in scorn, or even worse, that no one will care about their work at all. But the only way to succeed is to want your work to be exposed to the opinions of others. You must learn to accept, ignore, or contend with the notes and comments that you will inevitably receive. In short, you must welcome the scrutiny. Be brave. Allow others to judge your work. Be prepared to deal with the reactions as they come, and they will come. At some point, you must let your work out of its cage and see how it flies. Otherwise, you will have left the task unfinished. And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. This podcast would not have been possible without the tremendous support of the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.